Hey guys, Vipin here again. Today's topic we're going to talk about joint stock companies, and this is very important for the first PUC students. Okay, I am going to give you a lot of information when it comes to joint stock companies because you guys need to know this in detail. It's very important from the examination point of view, and being commerce students, you should know a lot about joint stock companies, why they're so important and what makes them so unique, what makes them so different. Okay, now firstly let's look at why people would want to go about setting up a company. Okay, why bother going about setting up a company when you can take up sole proprietorship, when you can take up partnership, or when you can take up other forms like, for example, cooperative societies. Okay, now why would you take up a company? The big reason for that would be the benefits you would get and the privileges that you would get in companies which are not available in other forms of organizations. Okay, if I were to consider a partnership, the maximum number of members I would be able to get is about 20. Okay, and now when you have 20 members in a partnership firm or 20 partners in a partnership firm, the amount of work you can do is limited to only that 20. And now 20 people, the amount of capital they can contribute will be quite less. If I were a partner in a partnership firm, I would consider contributing, I would not really consider, sorry, to contribute a large amount of money because one, there is unlimited liability associated with it. If I were to invest money from my savings and if that were to lead to a big loss, I would have to go about liquidating my personal assets in order to repay that loss. So that's a pretty big chance that I need to take when I go about making investments through a partnership firm. Now, all that problems can be avoided if you go about setting up a company. Okay, usually how it would start is, if you are starting a business, you would start off as a sole proprietor, and as the business grows you realize you need more people to run the business, so you get another person to do it, you have partnership there, and there will come to a phase in the business life cycle where even that partner is not capable of doing, you need more and more members to do the job, and when you need more and more people to do the job you need more capital, and hence you have that company form of ownership. So that's the reason why you would go about doing. Now, as I describe more of the features of companies, you will see why that sets them aside from the rest. Okay, now let's move on to features of a company. This could come for a 10-mark question. The number of points that you have in this is quite less, but the explanation that you need to give in this is quite a lot. Okay, so bear with me, and this is going to get very interesting from now on. When it comes to one important feature of a company, you have legal formation. Legal formation here refers to, unlike sole proprietorship or a partnership, you can't go about setting up your business by just putting up a board in front of your home. You need to go through the regulations and the provisions of Companies Act 1956. That's what they mean when it comes to legal formation. When you want to start a company, you need to follow Companies Act. When you want to shut down a company as well, you need to go through the procedure which is mentioned in Companies Act, and only then can you shut it down. Now that's not so the case when it comes to a sole proprietorship, nor is it when it comes to a partnership. When it comes to a sole proprietorship and a partnership, you could shut down your business and you need not inform the High Court about the closure of your business. You could very well just shut shop and shut down the business overnight. Okay, so legal formation here refers to going through the procedures of Companies Act. Now, in case you are aware, Companies Act is one of the lengthiest acts in Government of India, only second to the Constitution, you could say. Then there is everything that is mentioned in Companies Act, the do's and don'ts, how managers are supposed to work, how directors are supposed to work, the role of a company secretary, all those provisions you need to follow when you go about setting up a company. So you can see the long list of procedures that is there when it comes to starting a company, which is not so the case when it comes to a partnership or a sole proprietorship. Then artificial person. Now the company is considered to be an artificial person, which means it has some of the privileges that you and I have, but it is present up to an extent. Now, an artificial person here refers to, although the company is considered as a non-living entity, it is able to open a bank account in its own name. It's able to take up an insurance policy in its own name. In fact, if you get your first offer letter from a company, you will notice that the name of the company says, for example, HSBC India Private Limited is hiring, followed by your name. Here you have an artificial person which is in fact hiring you. You don't have the name of an HR person who is mentioned in the offer letter saying that this guy is in fact hiring you. You have the name of a company that is mentioned when it comes to artificial person. Okay. Now, like I said, the benefits you and I have when it comes to taking up an insurance policy or a bank account, or even more importantly, entering into a contract, all that is something which a privilege only a company can get. Okay. Then perpetual existence. We've all come across companies which are decades, generations old. In India alone, you have quite a few companies that go back to our pre-independence era. Like for example, the Tata Group is there, State Bank of India is there, and of course ITC, Indian Tobacco Company. All these companies date back to India's pre-independence era. So as you can see, these companies are in fact generations old. Now what happens here is, because even when a person in the top management were to retire, say the CEO, the director, vice president, anyone, you will always find someone who is able to replace them and carry on with the working of a business. It's not so the case with a sole proprietorship or a partnership firm. In a sole proprietorship or a partnership firm, you don't really see people do something which they refer to as headhunting. Headhunting, contrary to the name, which is pretty barbaric as it sounds, you don't really see the partners or the sole proprietor look for people who can replace him and carry on the business. If there is no one able to continue, they all wind up. That's not so the case when it comes to a joint stock company. You will find someone who is able to carry on the business. One thing which I find very happy about this particular point is Deutsche Bank is in fact being headed by an Indian. According to me, a German bank, and you know how Germans are when it comes to brown skinned and any other race, in fact, historically speaking, you have a brown guy in fact heading that bank, which is pretty cool if you think of it. You have an Indian, in fact, Rajasthani, in fact, who happens to be heading that bank, Anshu Jain, who is heading that institution. So there, even though you are not able to find anyone to run the company from your own country, that doesn't limit your options. You have many places where you can look at, and you can always find someone who is able to carry on the business. Then separate legal entity. The owners of the company and the company are considered to be two different entities. Although remember, they are considered different entities, the company works because of the influence of the directors and the actions of the directors. However, if you were to come across a news article that says, say for example, ITC plans to increase hiring by 5,000 every year. That is, ITC is adding 5,000 jobs in a year. It is in fact the HR director of ITC who has given out the statement. He's the brain behind the logic that we want more people to work for ITC. It is not ITC in itself that's taking up the decision. So here is a case where even though the directors are the people who are actually taking the decision, the company is the one which is acting through or acting upon these decisions. You will never really see advertisements wherein they say Bill Gates is launching the new Windows 8. You'll always see things like Microsoft is launching Windows 8, not the people who are in fact part of the company which is mentioned when it comes to these things happening. So that's what they mean when it comes to separate legal entity. Then common seal. Now when you want to authorize transactions, when you want to validate transactions, the way in which you validate transactions today is through common seals. Now historically speaking, when you had common seals were once upon a time which were given to noblemen. If you look back at the old English history, you had lords, you had earls, dukes, people like them. If you have seen in fact Pirates of the Caribbean, Part 2, if I'm not wrong, they show one of the lords who has got a pretty thick ring on his right hand. He melts wax on an envelope and he embosses his insignia from that ring onto that molten wax, and that's able to provide the signature which is supposed to make Captain Jack Sparrow a free man. By the way, this is my second Pirates of the Caribbean reference in my videos. I'm a big fan of the franchise. Okay. Anyway, that's a case wherein you have common seals being used from such a long time. In Pirates of the Caribbean, they've actually shown the East India Company in the movie. Now, when Jack Sparrow is getting his freedom, it's in fact the East India Company who is hunting him all these days. And the Lord, once he puts the common seal onto that envelope, Jack Sparrow happens to be a free man. A common seal is a way to say that you approve a particular transaction. A company, being a non-living entity, cannot put its own signature. So you have a common seal as a substitute for this. Common seals were once upon a time a molten wax insignia. From then it's evolved to a rubber stamp, and today people take up digital signatures as well. Now, thanks to a recent West Bengal High Court ruling, a common seal is not required to be put across by every director of the company. Now, in this day and age, it's very difficult to find all the directors in one place to put across a particular signature. According to the West Bengal High Court, they've said if one director is able to put the signature and other directors are aware the transaction is happening, then that's considered okay under the law. You need not go about having anyone and everyone signing across on that particular transaction. Okay, so common seals today have become digital signatures, is what I could say. Now, why is it so important? Consider that you are being hired by a company. You will find the common seal of, say, the HR director on the bottom of the offer letter. That's a way to say that the company recognizes you as being hired. I've come across a number of cases where people have been defrauded by people who by these agents who've gone about printing fake offer letters. Recently, I came across a story where KPMG, some agents, unauthorized of course, had in fact printed fake offer letters of KPMG. It was just like any other letter, the KPMG logo on top, the registered office on top, and the details which went on to mention there. We are going about hiring you, please report on this particular date. And these people have defrauded and given KPMG a bad name. In fact, they've defrauded a lot of people here, of course, and they've given KPMG a bad name when they've done this. So always check whether the common seal is there when you enter into a transaction with the company or any contract with the company. That's a way to say the company recognizes the transaction, and only if they recognize the transaction does the transaction actually become valid. Then, limited liability, an excellent feature, a very excellent feature, because thanks to limited liability, companies are able to protect themselves from any losses that may happen. Now, you saw in the recent past how even gigantic software companies like Microsoft have come out with some pretty shitty products. Like, for example, they came out with Windows Vista. Prior to that, they came out with an MP3 player called Zune. All these products did miserably. Now, if you had Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer as partners doing these products, these guys would have had to bear a pretty fat loss, and that could pretty much bankrupt them. Now, since it's Microsoft that is actually having to bear the loss, Microsoft's liability is limited to the assets which may be there in the company. That is in the worst case scenario, of course. Okay, so that's what they mean when it comes to limited liability. One more here, you could say, General Motors, which recently the American government gave them a big fat bailout. For generations together, General Motors has been making terrible cars. Okay, but over a course of time, the company had to declare bankruptcy. They had to go about liquidating their assets. But none of the assets of the directors who were in fact behind the business were considered for the problems that went on across over a course of time. That is, the company had to bear the loss and the directors could just sit back, even though you could say these guys are the people who are the brainchild behind those bad decisions. So that's what they mean by limited liability. Moving on. Types of companies here could come for a 10-mark question as well. You need to know these topics in detail. Alright. Now, firstly, you have separated the companies from to two different categories based on ownership and nationality. The first one there is a private company. Now I'll give you the information of a private company before the 2013 Companies Act Amendments Bill. So there's been a lot of changes when it comes to features of a private company, but I'll still give you the old information on that because that's unfortunately what the PU board only knows. So a private company is a type of company where you have just a minimum of two people required to start a business. The total number of members in a private company is about 50. Minimum capital required is 1 lakh. Now, a private company is usually considered as an extended form of a family business. Okay, a very good example of a private company is MTR. MTR, although is generations old, it still continues to be a family business. That is, you have the Mayas family who is in fact heading MTR. Even though they're generations old, the way in which they work is extremely conservative. You don't see them be as aggressive as how these other food and beverage companies like Jubilant Foodworks are. Private companies, in fact, very, very conservative. They like to keep their operations small, pretty much like a family business itself. However, unlike a regular family business, a Hindu undivided family, these guys have got the benefit of limited liability. Then a public company or a public limited company here. In a public limited company, the total amount of capital that you can contribute is, the minimum amount of capital you can contribute is 5 lakhs. Okay. The minimum number of members in a public limited company is 7. Okay. Public limited companies don't have any cap on the total number of members that can be there in this business. You could have, in fact, lakhs together people who are part of a public limited company. In fact, that's what happens to these large companies like SBI or Reliance or the Tata Group. The number of shareholders in these companies runs to lakhs or even crores, in fact. Okay. Then a department undertaking. This is a type of company which is owned by the government of India. More importantly, this is in fact owned by or looked after by a particular minister in government of India. Okay, a good example for this, of course, would be the Indian Railways. Okay, the Indian Railways is in fact one of the oldest department undertakings in the country. Apart from that, you even have the Post Office of India, which is also categorized as a department undertaking. In both the cases, you have a minister who's heading the organization and not any particular director who's in fact looking after these organizations. Then statutory companies. These are the companies in fact who are regulating industries. For example, you have SEBI, which looks after the capital markets, the stock exchanges and companies as well up to a big extent. Statutory companies are extremely powerful institutions. No matter what decision they come about with, you don't see any politician go about objecting towards their decisions, objecting towards what they have to say. Okay, a good example for this would be the way SEBI caught hold of the Sahara Group when it comes to the poor information that they provided when it comes to the debenture subscription in the recent years. Now here, you did not have any politician who went about interfering and saying that what SEBI did was wrong. And SEBI should not have been so aggressive in the way they treated the Sahara Group. You do not come across cases where any politician or any authority goes about objecting towards what a statutory company does. Another example would be TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. In fact, if you remember when they reduced the number of SMSs we could send from unlimited to just about 100 per day, you did not have a single organization, especially students here, who went about making objections saying that we need to be texting non-stop and you guys are interfering with that, interfering in our lives. Okay, then PSUs are public sector undertakings. Please do not confuse yourself between a public sector undertaking and a public limited company. Okay, a public sector undertaking could either be registered as a private limited company or a public limited company. A PSU is a company wherein the minimum amount of control by the government of India or the Karnataka government is about 51%. A good example of a PSU is BMTC, okay, or you have State Bank of India or even for example the subsidiaries of State Bank of India, ITC, all that is in fact classified as a PSU. PSU companies do not operate for the sake of providing service. They are in fact as keen on profit motive as any other company in the market. For example, BSNL, they are as competitive as Airtel, pun intended, remember that. So they are as competitive as Airtel or any other company in the telecom business. Then you have holding companies. A holding company is wherein one company provides share capital for another company. But here remember, when the other company, the larger company, when it provides share capital to the smaller company, the larger company doesn't go about interfering in the management affairs of the smaller company. Okay, a good example for this would be IBM, which is in fact funding Tesla Motors. Okay, IBM is funding Tesla Motors, but here IBM is not interfering in the work of Tesla. If Tesla decides to come out with a small car, contrary to the regular sports electric cars as they make, you may not really come across IBM interfering in this matter. One more example to this would be Edelweiss Securities, which was the holding company for Manappuram before Edelweiss withdrew their investment. And the reason why Edelweiss withdrew their investment is because they got extremely fat returns by investing in Manappuram in the early days. Makes me wish that I had done that rather than Edelweiss. But anyway, moving on, subsidiary companies are those wherein, okay, this gets a little complicated, so you need to pay attention to this. Consider the Tata Group, Tata Motors in fact. Tata Motors has got a subsidiary which happens to be Tata JLR. Now, a subsidiary company is also referred to as a sister concern. Okay. Now, why would you go about setting up a subsidiary, a smaller company under a larger company? One big reason for that is you can take up specialization when you do that. But the other reason they do that, which is not really disclosed, is that you can save your own skin when you were to get into any problems with that subsidiary company. Firstly, I'll tell you how Tata Motors and JLR have been cleverly structured in this procedure. When Tata acquired JLR, they knew very well that it's not going to be an easy business to do. Okay, because if you look at it, India is still an emerging market when it comes to buying automobiles like Jaguar and Land Rover. They are quite expensive products in fact. You don't really have a lot of people who are ready to buy this so easily. Even after it's been quite a few years since they acquired it, you still see JLR which is making losses. Okay, now let's assume that these losses were to go on for several years. There are two things that could happen now. Tata Motors can say, we are unable to go about continuing bearing the loss, and they could eventually come out with a press statement saying that JLR is going to shut down. However, if Tata Motors had a branch, a division within itself, wherein they were making JLR, like how they are making Indica, Sumo, Storm, all that. If that were to be the case, Tata Motors would be forced to in fact protect JLR and have JLR continue. Okay, to protect JLR and have it continue. Since JLR is now considered as a subsidiary, they can in fact say it's a different company altogether. I don't see why we should go about helping it out. In fact, you saw the same thing which happened when it comes to United Breweries and the Diageo deal and Kingfisher as well. Kingfisher is in fact a subsidiary of UB Group, but when Diageo was giving a large amount of funding to UB Group, not a single paisa was in fact given to Kingfisher, even though Kingfisher was in some severe financial discomfort. That's the reason why you go about setting up a subsidiary. You do this so that you can go about protecting yourself from any big fat loss in the future. Okay. Now, chartered companies are those which have been set up by the Royal Crown. You will find quite a few chartered companies in these monarchy run countries, like for example Saudi, Kuwait. Quite a few of the Gulf countries in fact have got a lot of chartered companies there. In fact, one of the first companies which were to be set up in India, the English East India Company, was also a chartered company. Okay, mostly if you look at chartered companies were set up for two reasons. One, for the purpose of taking up slavery, and secondly to take up exploration and colonization work. Okay, then Nationality, based on the origin of these companies, you can classify them into Indian or foreign. Indian companies are like SBI, ITC, Reliance, all this get categorized as an Indian company. Companies like, for example, Nokia, Siemens. Yeah, you can giggle at the name Siemens. I am not sure who decided to come out with such a name. A lot of men are quite giggling at that name right now. All that gets categorized as a foreign company. Okay. Um, there is a little bit more when it comes to this topic. I will do that in another video. All right. I hope I made the topics clear. If you have any queries, if you have any doubts, do leave it in the comment section below. Okay, somewhere there. Yeah, somewhere there. I think the comment section is. Okay. Leave a comment there and do go about subscribing to my videos. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a nice day.